Hello, everyone. It's Louis Yakumi from LConnect, another in conversation with. This time, someone most of you will know, Marc Brazeau, who most of you will know from his Fiat Chrysler days, but he's been in various industries and still is. So it's great to welcome Marc to today to share his thoughts on the automotive and other industries. Hi, Marc.
Hey, Louis, thanks a lot for having me. I appreciate the opportunity to connect
It's
again.
our pleasure. So, can you give us a little bit of your background? You've been in a couple of different sectors, automotive a couple of times in other sectors. So, what have you, what is your kind of history on that?
So look, my background is on the sell side of transportation, the supplier side. I started with Canadian Pacific Railway as an account manager in mines and metals, doing dirty industrials, which was a great kind of training ground. It's one of those jobs where they give you the keys to your desk and say, here you go. So rail was kind of sink or swim at the time. But I moved out of mines and metals into automotive very quickly. And so I did, while I was still in Toronto, I worked with Toyota and Honda and Mazda. And
Mhm.
then when we had the opportunity to move to Detroit, I was the national account manager for originally the Chrysler Group, right before Daimler Chrysler.
Mm.
So I was there for a few years, just short of 3 years probably, and then I left the industry and went to do my MBA. And while I was doing my MBA, I hung out a consulting shingle, and we were able to work with Canadian Pacific Railway and the Union Pacific to create an online track and trace tool. This is going way back, right? So coming out of that experience, Ed Sprock at Chrysler, someone that I had worked with very closely, sort of reached out and said, "Hey, have you ever been interested in moving to Detroit, sort of permanently and joining the automotive side of it, the buy side?" And that was a great opportunity that I jumped at. So I spent the better part of the Daimler Chrysler days, through 2007, in various roles in finished vehicle logistics strategy and sort of global supply chain strategy support. Um, and in 2007, I left and started another consulting firm to focus on organizational supply chain organization and efficiency, right? And it coincided with the downturn in 2008, and so I pivoted into oil and gas, and I did oil and gas for the better part of 3 years until I folded that into my time with Alex Partners. So I worked with Alex Partners then for another 3 years before Bill Cook then contacted me and said, any interest in coming back to automotive? And I remember at the time I said no. I had no interest in going back. But I did realize through those conversations that, I didn't leave automotive because of the people or because of the industry. I really left automotive because it felt at the time, as we were going into a downturn, that just felt there was a lack of opportunities, right, for my own growth. So the more I thought of it over the course of sort of 30 days, it reignited the passion for the work that we did in automotive. And so I was fortunate enough to be able to go back to that version of Chrysler, Fiat Chrysler, and spent about 6 years there as the head of logistics, and through the first year of Stellantis. And then just over 4.5 years ago, Constellation Brands called me and asked if I was interested in coming over, to the CPG side, and that was a great opportunity because sector-wise, I'd always been in the industrial sectors, and I'd never done a consumer product, certainly not, anything from a food standpoint. So it was a great opportunity, and yeah, I jumped at it. So I've been with Constellation Brands now for 4.5 years. It's been a fantastic opportunity. It's been a fantastic ride. We've done some amazing things, particularly from the supply chain standpoint, that I credit at least my contribution from my time in automotive, right? I mean, the complexity of an automotive supply chain. I think that if you've been able to spend more than a decade in automotive supply chains, you can probably do just about anything. So So it's been great. That's been the last 25 years.
Yeah. So you've been, on the sales side, you've been, at consulting and therefore looking at different sectors of supply chain. Why logistics? Why was that your kind of main focus as you went away from Alex Partners and into the automotive industry?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, originally, um, I started as a summer job with Canadian Pacific Railway, and my mother worked at Canadian Pacific Railway, so she was able to get me a summer fill job doing manual labor in the yards, right? And I always joke that I didn't choose logistics; logistics chose me. And so, if I look at my career, the early parts of my career, it truly was in, the sell side, transportation heavy, distribution heavy.
Mm.
But then as I migrated more through consulting and into the buy side,
Yeah.
philosophically, I really started to think that this wasn't about the work I was doing. It was more about the people that I was working with, and what I was finding with the logistics sector, not even the companies necessarily, but the folks that were in logistics and the people you dealt with both on the buy and the sell side. um, they were just super curious, and so it satisfied, my philosophy the last 15 years for how I chose jobs or opportunities or even, consulting engagements was came down to one thing. I wanted to do interesting work with interesting people. Didn't matter the title, didn't matter the level of influence. It really was, hey, is this a good group of people that we're going to have fun figuring something out? And two, does the work move the needle, right? And I don't know of any other sector that I've been exposed to that, at least in my generation, um, that moves the needle as much as global logistics. I mean, I've been fortunate in the last 30 years to really span sort of the pan-regional complexities through global growth and globalism across trade. It feels like that you've just ridden that tsunami of complexity, innovation, entrepreneurialism. And look, for most of us in logistics, we get to see our products in use or the things that we've touched in use walking out the door every day. Wherever you travel, you can see what you've had a piece in delivering and or creating on the street or in a store. So it's been a great ride.
But you say how much logistics moves the needle and touches so many sectors. In the last interview I did, or in a recent one I did with Frank Bauer, he talked about the next CEOs, next generation of CEOs should come from supply chain and logistics. So
Sure.
would you agree with that?
I would. And look, I think we're seeing that already, right? If you look at the traditional path, right? Or I'll go back to the industrial side, and even
Yeah.
rail was very much like automotive, where
Mm.
you kind of had a chief procurement officer
Mhm.
that owned both procurement and supply. And
Yeah.
I would argue that that's the traditional model, that,
Mhm.
that's the way, you manage the money, right? Sort of finance driven, CFO driven, CPO
Yeah.
driven, and then operations, right? But look, we've all seen over the last 20 years, particularly with the growth of pure play logistics, like if you look at Walmart, they'll say they're a supply chain company. If you look
Yeah.
at Amazon, they're a supply chain company, right?
Mhm.
So the advent of the chief supply chain officer in the last, let's say, 15 years, I mean, you're seeing that. You're seeing the C-suite, including supply chain number one. And now you're starting to see the decisions, particularly in the consumer goods piece, where your chief supply chain officer owns the procurement and the supply chain stuff.
Mhm.
So there's a bit of a shift. But in my experience, I think both those components are so critical to be working in tandem that I'm not sure that one supersedes the other, right? So for me, I like the idea that we get to work, at least where we are, with a chief procurement officer and a chief supply chain officer, and we get to really explore the trade-offs of basically total landed cost or total cost of ownership, right? Everyone is finally at the table, where I think people my age or maybe a little older would have argued 20 years ago that we're never at the table for the big decisions.
Yeah.
And I think that's
Yeah.
changed dramatically.
It's still slower in automotive, though. I'm seeing it in the other industry, but automotive is still slow on that, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so your move from automotive to other industries, in this particular instance, let's start with the latest one. What is the biggest lesson you learned from changing industry, and what surprised you the most in your first period when you first went from automotive to the kind of consumer, drinks or industry at Constellation?
Yeah.
What was your biggest surprise when you moved across?
Well, the biggest surprise is usually is, and I'll talk for myself personally, so I don't
Yeah,
look at it as what was the external surprise, right?
yeah,
The it's always the discovery of the internal surprise. And the internal surprise for me coming from automotive for the most part was the cultural bias that you bring with you. Um, can either be a positive or a negative, depending on this on the organization, the scale and scope, or the work that you guys do, right, or the industry. So, for me, particularly in this space, I had to learn how to go slow to go fast, right?
okay.
Because particularly in automotive and also in consulting, particularly the
Mhm.
type of consulting we did at Alex Partners or that Alex Partners does, is you're really brought in when critical decisions have to be made, right? And in automotive, you have to make critical decisions. Decisions get made every day, and they're either autocratically done, or if you're good at your job, you've empowered your people and trained your people to be able to make those decisions on the spot without risking, the rest of the enterprise. So for me, you bring that with you, that speed, right? That bias for action. And not to say that there's not a bias for action elsewhere, but it's just heightened because of the complexity and the pressure in automotive or in some of these highly cyclical economic industries, right? So for me coming over, I mean, it was such a unique culture. One, the company is an amazing company, and the lack of artifice and the lack of politics in this company is just a really, really fantastic place to create and to open up. But I could have come in guns blazing. I could have come in and said, "Well, this is not how we do it in automotive." And look, some of my colleagues would say that I did do a bit of that, um, but they were good enough to have an onboarding resource for me that was able to walk me through the culture. And I'll tell you, that first 6 months, I was told by everybody, top to bottom, don't do anything. Just sit and get to know everybody. Get to know everybody. And it was the hardest 6 months of my career. I've been doing this a long time. I thought I knew how to assimilate. I thought I knew how to add value immediately. I thought I knew how to assess situations. But, it's a perfect example of you're never too old to learn, particularly some of these really critical life skills. And this one for me was fantastic because had I not had that resource, I could have washed out within a year and a half there because I just didn't fit the culture, right? But having that touch point and being able to have the grace to sort of, okay, I don't have to make a difference in the first 6 months, which is you ask anybody in automotive and it'll be like, if I'm not contributing within months, I don't know what I'm going to do at the end of the year, right? And so that was a really eye-opening piece for me. So I would say that the cultural bias as the new person on the team, really taking the time to sort of say, okay, what are the cultural differences that I have to be aware of, and how fast can I do certain things? Because that, if you take the time properly, it allows you to set up your strategy, but more importantly, set up the sequences of the things in your strategy so that you space it out over time to gain credibility and get success and get adoption, right? And that was a really unique learning experience for me because I was slightly worried about going to CPG this late in my career. Like it was one of those pieces that I wasn't sure what was all of this going to translate. And I'm sure we're going to talk about how it did translate, but it translated amazingly in a lot of things. But the number one thing was that 6 months go slow to go fast. That was the most eye-opening thing. And it's the most valuable thing that I'm going to take with me moving forward. So.
Yeah. And what's important for you in your supply chain role at the moment? Where do you think you contribute the most? Is it cost? Is it service? Is it growth? Different industries. I've
Yeah.
heard stories where people have gone into other industries and were surprised how cost wasn't the main wasn't the main thing. That, in fact, it was
Sure.
almost a negative thing if you focus too much on cost.
Yeah.
So how does it work in your industry now?
So it's interesting because in a lot of ways, this is a lot like automotive. But logistics, again, going back to your original question, right?
Yeah.
I don't care what industry you're in or what company you work for. Cost, service, and quality. Those are the
Yeah.
three legs to the stool. And
Mm.
as logisticians, we don't get to choose all three. You get to choose one, and the other two have to be on a sliding scale, right?
Mm.
And I would argue that at my time, in the 20 some odd years that I was with any variation of Chrysler,
Mm.
I think everybody would agree that we were the cost conscious, manufacturer. We for logistics, we started with cost. We started with cost per case, and then service and quality kind of fit in where we can get it. Other people focus on quality. I mean, Toyota is
Mm.
another example where quality across the whole system was arguably their focus there.
Mm.
And so for us, we just came out of a 10-year 59 straight quarters of economic growth, right, of sales growth,
Yeah.
sort of unprecedented kind of hyper growth, right? And over a decade of hyper growth, you could imagine, particularly anybody in the logistics space,
Mm.
you know that you're going to end up spending more money satisfying the growth than you
Yeah.
are the system, right? And so I think part of what I was able to bring to the table was really this: hey, we're at this inflection point where we're now a Fortune 500 company. We've had this hyper growth, but
Mm.
we also have to be prepared for the potential that this becomes cyclical for us, right? And so for when I came in, my first order of business was being laser focused on cost per unit, right?
Yeah.
So cost per case. So no
Mm.
different than how we would have looked at it at FCA or Daimler Chrysler is,
Mm.
what does it cost us to bring the materials in at a unit level, and what does it cost us to deliver the unit out? And then every year set the chalk line, and every year try and improve on that. So we were laser focused on cost per case, and that required, some education, but we also learned a lot from folks that had been doing this a long time at Constellation Brands, and the team that I had is outstanding. In fact, the team that we started with, or I started with 4 years ago, they're all still intact some way, shape, or form in the organization, but we've grown the organization threefold in just 3.5 years, right? So we've gone from 25 folks to 85 folks. But it's been in this chase of continuous improvement, and we needed the arms and legs to go do the things, to create resiliency. So for me, the contribution early on, the first 3 years, 4 years, was really what I would refer to as cleaning the houses, coming in and saying, okay, let's get our cost per case under control, so that in the event of a downturn, in the event of a crisis, that piece is already in shape to be flexible for when we have to move. That won't have a huge impact financially on the rest of the company.
Yeah.
And now we're moving on to operational efficiency and excellence, right? So quality kind of took care of itself. We created an in-transit damage prevention and quality team for logistics, which we didn't have. That was part of the
Yeah.
growth. So a year and a half ago, we created the damage prevention team. So within the transportation or the logistics space, cost per case was our driver. We invested in the quality side of the house so that we can get that up and running in relation to cost per case. And now we're really teed up to focus on operational efficiency for the better part of the next few years. So
Mhm. When I interviewed the head of global logistics at Adidas, who'd also come from automotive and moved to Adidas, he talked about changing industries was very much about making sure the individual who's making that move, the executive, has got a kind of an open mindset, open-minded to be ready for the change. And you said already with that 6 month where you had to like sit back and learn more about the industry. So what have been the kind of the mindset that you've needed to adopt, or the management kind of challenges, or understanding the culture, someone moving from automotive into another industry? What is that kind of how do they as individuals have to be ready for that?
Yeah, and that's a really interesting question because I always kind of pull it back into as the individual, are you an introvert? Are you an extrovert? Are you autocratic? Are you empathetic? Like I hate to bring sort of soft sciences into such
Mm,
a, again, complex,
yeah,
measurable industry. But I found in the last 15 years, 10, 15 years that's what works for me is taking the time to get to know the resources on the team. Because I've found the same level of talent, curiosity, innovation kind of everywhere
yeah,
that I've kind of, to varying degrees. So for me, it was really about making sure that I wasn't leading with my ego, right? Where I wasn't, oh, I'm the difference maker here. I'm the change maker here. I'm
yeah,
coming in and I'm the reason why, right? And that to me always felt uncomfortable because
mhm,
one, it puts way too much pressure on you as a single individual, regardless of what level you're at, um, to perform. And and when you're first starting in a new company, there's 1,000 things you don't control, and there's a
yeah,
thousand things you can't influence because you don't
yeah,
have any credibility, right? So for me, it really was about leaving my ego at the door, leaning into the concept of interesting people and interesting work, and then being super open and using that 6 months, using that time to sort of get to know, you know, what are the philosophies that exist, and I was fortunate because, the logistics team at Constellation Brands culturally was really, really consistent with kind of what I had tried to build at
mhm,
FCA, right? It was really much a team approach with a lot of empowerment, a lot of open transparency, a lot of debate, a lot of arguing, no stripes, all that stuff, right? And so that felt comfortable to me. And then all I had to do was not get in my own way, to be honest with you. I just had to be patient and not
yeah,
lead with my ego. And then all of a sudden you saw this momentum start to grow over the course of that first 12 months. And then by year two and year three, you're then really just directing the strategy,
yeah.
right? And introducing the changes in a way that you think you could best extract value. So that's been my journey here. It's one of those things that I wish I would have known 20 years ago, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And from automotive, we used to think that the automotive was the cutting edge industry, and maybe it was for a few years. I'm not sure it is now, but it was for a few years. But on the positive side, what could you take from automotive that was almost unique to automotive and took into your new world?
That's a really good question because everything has a different level of complexity. I'd
Yeah,
still be hard pressed not to argue that automotive logistics, it's the top, man. Like it's if you do automotive logistics and you could benchmark where you're doing it well in relation to the
yeah,
rest of the automotive industry,
mhm,
you're a pretty good logistician.
yeah,
So I don't know that there was anything different. I mean, the thing that's great about automotive is the constant repetition and the constant risk of chaos or crisis exercises different muscles, right?
mhm,
So you end up looking at things differently. You end up looking at things in terms of risk, in terms of failure, in terms
yeah,
of redundancy, in terms of resiliency that are present everywhere else, but
mm,
may not be as critically important to their muscle building
yeah,
journey, right? So what I found is it was very much sort of you come in with this bias for action where you have to solve a problem, you have to make a
yeah,
decision, you have to move on. And across my different experiences in consulting, here or anywhere else, is you see varying degrees of that bias for action. You'll be
mm,
in certain environments where you'll talk about the same thing for 4 weeks in a row. And in automotive, you'll have made the decision in the first meeting, right?
yeah,
Um, and you'll have a lot of committees and a lot of consensus. Where in
mhm,
automotive, it tends to be, hey, we'll look around the room. There's 12 of us in the room, but we know that individual 8, you're the accountable person for this. So we're
Yeah.
going to all talk about it. But when the
Yeah.
decision gets made, you're the one that has to make it happen when you come out of the room. And
Mm.
that to me is just experiential muscle building that is ever present in automotive. And I would imagine it's ever present in places like Amazon, or ever present in places where, delivery is critical. And so to me, that's the biggest thing, is how do you throttle back your bias for action? How do you create room in the room for feedback and other people to come along at the pace that they're comfortable with? And then
Mm.
how do you develop the organization so that they understand, for the sector that you're in, what level of bias needs to be there, right? Because sometimes you're in an organization where you feel like you're constantly behind the curve. You're it's a hockey stick, mentality, and you're kind of doing, unusual things to save the day at the end of a period. Well, that to me is, low bias for action early in the process, right? So how do you pull that back? How do you smooth things out? So that to me is the biggest thing. If you've been in automotive for long enough, those muscles are just, 3 steps ahead, that if this fails, then 5 other
Mm.
things are going to fail, and it's the 5th thing that fails that I'm going to get in trouble for, and I don't want to be in that position, right? So you tend to overthink those risks, and you tend to, and then, you're limited sometimes by the size of the team, or, you
Yeah.
go from a team like at FCA, where we, collectively we had 200 people in logistics, right? And then you come to some place where it's, hey, you got 50 people. Well, how do you deploy those resources in a way without expecting the same results that you've had? You have to build the structure, and you have to bring people along at the pace. You have to meet them kind of where they are, right? So it's an interesting organizational development challenge to get out of this bias for action, really understand the sector you're in, really understand the company you're in culturally,
Mm.
and then how do you then start building up those pieces to get to where you as the individual, is kind of comfortable that you've covered all the risks that are important.
Mhm. And what about the 3PLs, or the logistics companies? What have been the differences, working with those? Is it the same? Your expectations, your KPIs are the same, or is it, what advice would you give to the 3PLs now, having worked in different sectors?
Well, and that's the other interesting thing is, you know, this space, I've been really fortunate. I said
Mm.
earlier that the finished vehicle side is sort of the
Yeah.
the most fun side and the best side to be on, in my opinion.
Yeah.
So oil and gas, when I moved out of automotive into oil and gas, I was on the downstream side, which is the refinery to the gas stations, right?
Mm.
That's the area that I played in. And what was very clear to me was, holy crap, this is exactly like finished vehicle logistics. You've got very few production points to thousands of independently owned distribution points.
Yeah.
In oil and gas specifically, you've got specialized equipment like you do in finished vehicles, right? And
Mm.
so, and you've got a state control board, right? So there's regulations and rules, and
Mm.
what the manufacturer can do and how they distribute. So moving into that space was, it felt like hand in glove. And
Mm.
the things that we learned and did in automotive, particularly the finished vehicle side, you could translate to oil and gas companies as they were making this transformation away from, consolidated upstream and downstream to separate
Mm.
entities, right? So you're able to add all this value to sort of say, hey, you can save money tomorrow by doing this, this, and this.
Mm.
Coming into beverage alcohol in the
Mm.
United States is exactly the same thing. It's a 3-tier system from a sales standpoint in the States. So you've got the regulations, you've got the very few production locations, a lot of independent companies that you have to service. So when I first came over here and I saw that, I was like, this is great. I don't have to learn the work. I just have to learn the culture and the sector and everything else, right? So my first thought was, fantastic. We are going to bring in big 3PLs that have
Mm.
big processes and big
Mm.
standards, global standards, and we are going to disaggregate our little distribution network with these global standards.
Mm.
And so that was that was a bias. That was an automotive bias because the 3PLs that do bev alcohol in the United States, let's say there's maybe a dozen of them. They're very specialized. They don't do anything else other than alcohol. They've been
Mm,
doing the 3PL alcohol stuff and the distributor stuff for decades.
mm,
And in my first sourcing event, I brought in a bunch of others that nobody had ever considered that were global in nature, and they couldn't compete. They could not figure out. And look, there's some of them that do beverage alcohol in certain
mm,
cases, right? They couldn't figure out the pricing, at least for us. They couldn't figure out the warehouse standards and the velocity requirements. And so I gained a really true appreciation for sector specific expertise. And our 3PLs, the ones that we do business with, they've been partners for, again, decades for us. They're all continuous improvement adherents. They're all willing to make investments in digital transformation tools that we've been focused on here the last few years.
mm,
They've all been partners at the table for productivity, right? So I find the same behaviors that we would have gotten out of our 3PLs, our global standard 3PLs in automotive. I find the same thing here, but in a subsector approach. And so again, it's that bias, right, where you come in and go, oh, I think bigger is better, and I think
yeah,
that a bigger scale and scope will really know how to drive efficiency here, and
mm,
it hasn't been the case, at least for us. And we've been able to get our service providers to really embrace the idea of productivity and continuous improvement because they were already on that path.
mm. So your finished vehicle experience helped you in this sector as well, whereas I wouldn't have thought that was going to be the case. Again, my bias as well, but it has helped you understand working with specialist providers.
Well, it's I didn't have to relearn logistics.
Yeah,
Like the nuts and bolts of how you plan a network, how you design a network, how you source a network, and then how you operate a network.
mm,
Finished vehicle logistics in my experience, is exactly the same as oil and gas, on the downstream side, and is exactly the same as beverage alcohol. I don't know if it would be the same for other food stuff, groceries or
mm.
anything like that. That would be an environment where I would come in and feel like I'd have to learn the sector, and I'd have to learn the
Yeah,
logistics, the
yeah,
nuances of logistics for that sector.
yeah.
But it was really nice to sort of come in here and go, oh, wait a minute. I mean, take the product out, and everybody hates it here when I refer to it as liquid in a box, because everybody loves their product. We all love our products, right?
Yeah,
But as a pure logistician,
yeah,
like, what am I moving? I'm moving liquid in a box.
mm,
I'm moving metal on tires. I'm moving whatever.
yeah,
So if you take away the product and you just look at the
mm,
networks look like they overlap almost exactly, like
yeah,
between rail and truck and warehouse locations. So for all those things, it was one less thing that I had to learn.
mm,
So I was very fortunate that this was the company in the sector that allowed me to come over to CPG. I think again, that was very fortunate.
yeah. And what about the other way round? What lesson from the beverage industry, from Constellation, do you wish that or if you ever came back to automotive, would you want to take back to automotive?
It's going to sound very counterintuitive, and your automotive audience is going to laugh at it and dismiss it out of hand.
Yeah.
Um, but there's space to go slower, to go faster in automotive as well too.
Mm,
This constant need for speed, and look, you go from an industry that's cyclical in nature, that flirts with bankruptcy every 5 to 6 to 7 years, to a growing, healthy kind of balance sheet, income statement, P&L, that's standard within that sector. You have different luxuries in terms of how you want to look and spend your money, right? And so in automotive, I've always felt that there's an inordinate amount of stress and pressure and focus put on things that the end result is you create this steeled bias for action, where
mm,
when there's a crisis, everybody gets to the table and everybody solves the crisis and it's solved, and then you move on. But I also used to find that we deployed an awful lot of resources to explain why one car got stuck somewhere.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, so the
Yeah.
scale and scope, I used to say
Yeah.
that hey, look, if we take care of the forest, the trees are going to take care of themselves. But if you just want to focus on the trees, the rest of your forest is going to go fallow, right? And so that sometimes bounced up, as you could imagine, with other, with other leadership structures. Like, no, 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 you missed a rail switch, or you missed a truck didn't show up, and again, I was in the industry for 25 years, and I get the impact, I get the cost impact, but I don't know that the level of pressure doesn't steal some of the entrepreneurialism, and doesn't steal some of the long-term value, from the process. So I mean, look, I feel much less pressured here than I ever did in automotive. I think I'm getting the same results that I got in automotive as I got here. I think I'm developing strong logisticians and strong leaders that can go on and do other things. I think we've got a fantastic team. I think I did a great job building the team at FCA as well. Um, you know, but that would be the big takeaway, is that, there's certain areas, particularly in logistics, that if you give enough air and room to maybe go slower,
Yeah.
and trust that the experts that have chosen to be in this space, that don't go to manufacturing and don't go to sales, that I'm going to have a career that, like, as Ed Sprock said, those 7 jobs in logistics over the course of your career,
Mm.
that's an expertise that I sometimes think automotive discounts. And so that would be my big takeaway, that you know the ability to go slower, to go fast, rely on your subject matter experts that have chosen this industry and chosen this discipline, um, to do the right things. You can move mountains.
You say that, but do you think in the automotive, the next head of logistics or whatever car maker is going to be able to say, okay, thanks for giving me this position, but I believe you need to go slower to go faster in the end? Do you think that would work, or would they just put too much pressure on that person to go, just start now and start sprinting?
The pressure's incessant.
Mm.
That's the point, right? The pressure's incessant,
Yeah.
and you will generate, diamonds out of a portion of coal by having that pressure, right? Um, and look, from my experience too, right? I mean, I was a long line of philosophical directors at Daimler
Yeah.
Chrysler. Like, there was
Whatever.
kind of a string between Ed Sprock, Peter Weiss,
Mm.
Bill Cook, and myself over the course of
Mm.
20 years, that we were very consistent in our approach, and I think we were very successful. Um, and I think sometimes it's as easy as that, Louis. It's as
Mm.
easy as having someone sort of come in and say, "Hey, we can't keep blowing this up
Yeah.
because we think we're something else tomorrow." Like, there has to be consistency in logistics. I'm a firm believer that consistency and subject matter expertise kind of go hand in hand. And if I was ever tempted to go back to automotive, or if there was ever an opportunity, I mean, I'd be very, I mean, I'm at a different place in my career too.
Yeah.
It's easy for me to sort of say, look, this is how I would run the department. These are the things that are important to this success, that are important to the company's success.
Mm.
And if you look at it differently, then as you point out, it could end up being a bad fit or a poor fit. But you know what? I mean, I've been fortunate over my career that, for whatever reason, I've been with the right people in the right organizations at the right time. I've got nothing, but gratitude for the path that I've had, and the opportunities that I've had, either that I've created or other people have created for me. And
Mm.
I couldn't be any happier that I chose logistics as my discipline, rather than a certain company or a
Mm.
certain function, or a generalist in some sort. I really enjoy what I do.
Yeah. And you had some great characters there, like you said, Bill Cook, Ed Sprock,
Yeah.
and Peter Weiss. So that's some great characters there as well. But next, what about what's the most overrated trend that you think people, for me, up to a point, even though I use it all, I use Chat GPT all the time. I'm
Yeah.
scared that AI is overrated. But what do you think is the most overrated trend for supply chain and logistics?
It's a tough question. I mean, look, AI is top of everyone's mind, and I'll be the first to admit that that as much as I consider myself a strategist and a technologist over the course of my
Mm,
career, obviously, as I've gotten older, I've clearly kind of I'm getting outpaced by certain things that I would have been maybe an early adopter in. I'll
mm,
give you a quick anecdote. Like, so our fiscal year goes March to February, so we were setting up our next 3 year strategic sprint, and this is just in March of this year. And so, we had the things that we wanted to change, the things we wanted to focus on, how we would build on them over 3 years. And I don't think we mentioned AI implementation till
yeah,
2028, right? So it was like, so
mm,
it was
mm,
3 years out where we
yeah,
were going to extract some of that value. And then I was having a skip level luncheon with folks on the team, and we had analysts sort of saying, "Well, I use Chat GPT every day in my job," and I'm
mm,
like, "Well, what do you mean you use it in your job?" And so they explained to me sort of the clerical kind of
mm,
repetitive cleanup stuff, right?
mm,
So that started me on a journey of discovery, started us on a journey of discovery. So overrated or not, I think
mm,
the overrated piece is seeing this North Star that AI is going to completely transform what you do, right?
yeah,
And what I'm realizing, or at least the direction that we're going in, is AI is going to clean up the repetitive clerical
mm,
things that are the time sucks for our team not being able to develop themselves, right?
yeah,
So if I look at our analyst level, if they're doing 20% clerical work that can be disaggregated by an agentic AI, tool or bot, we're going to be exploring that because for me, we've grown the team because we need the people doing certain functions that maybe we didn't have full coverage on. And so I don't see it as an immediate disaggregator. I don't see it as an immediate, hey, we're going to be half the staff next week because AI is going to do all these things. I don't think that's the case. I think this feels for those of us that have been around long enough, right, Louis? It feels like 1998, 99 in terms of how the internet's going to change anything, and it took a
yeah,
whole nother decade before it actually had any
mm,
actual true impact, right, or scalable impact. So I think it's the flavor. I think it's important. I think it's something that we're all looking at. I think Amazon has done some amazing things with it. Google certainly has some
mm,
amazing things with it, and we're trying to learn as fast as we can. But our approach isn't creating a North Star around
yeah,
AI transformation. It really is about the simple blocking and tackling, right? Shipment
mm,
visibility, cost management, service performance,
mm,
and really leading for us with this idea of people, process, and technology, right? So for as and most of this conversation has been around the people we've worked with,
yeah,
the people we do work with, the companies that we interact with, the processes that are born either out of the complexity of automotive or out of the
mm,
flexibility of an entrepreneurial environment. And then the technology and comes into play is how do you then smooth that out and take incremental steps that don't blow your budget but that add value, right? So it it seems simple when you describe it. We all know it's complex, but it is one step at a time. So
yeah. And it's good that you said people, process, technology. It's good that despite all of these things, that people are still going to be at the forefront of everything still.
yes.
Mm, yeah.
Well, and
Okay.
that's why I think that logistics is such a small community, even from a
Yeah.
global standpoint, right? Is because it's a people business, right?
Yeah.
And even if you look across sectors, I mean, certainly the folks that right? And the folks that I've got to meet over the course of my career, those are all
Mm,
people that you can pick up the phone after a decade
yeah.
and you've got a shared experience, you've got a
Mm,
shared challenge,
yeah.
you've got a shared success, and I don't know if you get to have that in everything. So that's why I do think this remains a people driven space. Technology will always play a big part because if you think about shipment visibility
Yeah.
and digital technology, logistics was the sector that drove, most of the maturity, the usable, scalable maturity in that space for the last 20 years. So despite that leadership and technology piece, you still have a lot of people in the industry. You still have a lot of folks that help drive us forward. So um, I tell the interns that come into our space every year that they've made an amazing choice to start their career in supply chain.
Yeah.
Now that they have, I always wonder why they chose it in school. There seems to be better, more exciting programs to choose, but you've got really smart people coming out of school that are dedicated to supply chain, and when you give them the opportunity, certainly to work in logistics, it's fantastic. I would just caution anybody in automotive: don't let them start in finished vehicles because they'll never want to leave. The what would I bring over? Like, we have a bar in the office. It opens at 4:30 and it
Yeah.
closes at 7:30. And the
Wow.
amount of work that gets done at the bar
Yeah.
at between 4:30 and 7:30, and you've got the CEO all the way down to the analysts in this
Mm.
beautiful pub on the 12th floor,
Yeah.
and that to me has been more valuable than the free cars that we would get at Chrysler. So
Okay, that's fantastic. But thank you very much, Mark. I mean, your point there. Firstly, your history and the knowledge that you've shared and experiences that you shared has been great. And your point again, very importantly, that logistics is still and will continue to be a great career. It's still about the people. The technology is going to come and help us, I hope. Even though perhaps again showing my age that every time new technology was introduced, iPhones are going to make my life easier, laptops are going to make my internet, all of these things seem to have made my life harder. But I suppose we've got to just try and embrace it as well. But thank you very much for your time, Mark, and I look forward to sharing with this. A lot of people are going to, a lot of the stories are going to resonate with a lot of people, and of course, the next generation. I'm sure will pick up a lot of ideas and thoughts from this. So thank you very much for your time, Mark.
well, thanks, Louis. I appreciate the opportunity and great to catch up again.
Yeah.